Okay, so the previous video was sort of went off tangentially. I meant to just go right into the stanza, but I felt to make sure to kind of explain the idea for talking about mind and non-attachment to kind of bring that in. Again, I want to give the quick disclaimer. I'm not officially a Taoist. I'm not pushing any religion. I'm not pushing any spirituality. Really, um, I'm not an expert. I'm not a master. I'm not anything like that. I'm just merely trying to discuss some things that I think might help other people to think about, and is going to help me to think about it and talk about it and discuss it too, because one of the ways we learn is through sort of, you know, interacting with other people, teaching, guiding. We get that too, especially when I teach like Tai Chi and stuff like that. I learn some stuff. I'm just like, someone asks me a question and I do something or I answer the question. I'm like, oh wait, or this, and I'm like, oh, I didn't think about this before. Thank you. And I'll do that sometimes as well. So there's a little bit of through line with this too. The previous video again kind of went off talking about about non-attachment and the way it's sort of culturally seen coming in from a more actual sort of Taoist or Chinese or greater Eastern perspective culturally, at least, than the way we see it here in the West, because we'll see, mind and attachment and all this in a very mechanical, materialist reduction sort of fashion. That's kind of not where it's coming from. So just having that background with it. Okay, so first one, it's going to be stanza or chapter 71. First one is from the Element Classics of World Spirituality, the Tao Te Ching. Then it's translated by Man Ho Kwok, Martin Palmer, and Jay Ramsey. Mine's just a sort of hard sort of cover thing with this. So you can tell I've had it for a while. So this is the first one. So again, as I said in the previous video, and I'll reiterate here, this is sort of, I'm going through several different versions because the different translations will use different words, put them in sort of different ways and different patterns and all that. And if I just go with the one or two, it might not sort of click for somebody else. A combination of two or three or five or whatever like that might help stuff click for someone else. That's why I have like 5 different versions. That's why I've read probably a few other versions with it too. So it's just in the idea of, especially since I'm speaking English, we're going over this in English, uh, and especially since it's the idea of these is it's not supposed to be just a one-to-one word sort of directly into your brain. It's meant to be thought of. There's symbolism, and there's sort of a thoughtful engagement and even meditation, not necessarily even just like sitting meditation, but actually a meditation is in sort of thinking about about these. It's almost the closest sort of analog we might have is, if you read sort of occult books that, have a really sort of like a flowery, weird language. We're talking about alchemy in the West. It's not meant to literally be trying to make gold out of lead. That was an analogy, it was a symbol. And the people who really know what they're talking about know how to break that symbol down and work on themselves with that. So it's sort of like this. So that's why I'm trying to give multiple perspectives on it. So chapter 71 in this one is those who seem not to know and those who don't pretend they do. This is what it means to be flawed. If you're sick at this, then you'll win through. The sage he is sick of all faults. He is sick of being sick. He is well. So I want you to kind of like listen to, like this one saying he, I have another one that uses she for the sage or anything else like that, and how one thing that's going to have the same number of characters written out in Chinese is going to be translated in these different ways. So those who seem not to know and those who don't pretend they do, This is what it means to be flawed. If you're sick at this, then you'll win through. The sage is, he is sick of all faults. He is sick of being sick. He is well. This one's a little bit harder. There's a reason I haven't really read this as much as some of the other ones. Those who know seem not to know. I'm sure if I read that a little different before, so let me repeat that. Those who know seem not to know, and those who don't pretend they do. This is what it means to be flawed. So I think seem is a very important word with that. And knowing can be, an actual, like facts. Oh, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that, or in history it said this. A lot of the times he's kind of poking at the person who, you say something, and especially now in internet culture, we have, well, actually, every time I hear the word actually beginning something, I cringe, because there's always someone who has to put in some sort of thing with that. And it's almost never sort of prefaced where, well, it's been my experience, or to me, or I think that personal ownership of that perspective isn't taken. It's now everyone's got to be an expert on everything. I read it on YouTube. I have, everyone can get sort of certified for everything. And even if these certifications are through places of higher learning, that doesn't necessarily mean you have a degree. You went through a certain course of study and you have a certification. I have one that I want to sign up for now that has Egypt stuff like that. If I go through this thing, I just went through this course. And I don't care if it's Harvard or Yale or Oxford or anything. I just went through this course that's free online. And even if I paid a couple $100 or something for it, that's not an actual real university course that has now real credits behind it. That doesn't make me any more or less an Egyptologist or anything than any of the other books that I've read about Egypt, or any other lectures that I've listened to, or talks that I've had with people. So now if all of a sudden it's like, I go to a lecture from someone who's like, well, actually with it, it doesn't, no. So, we have those people, those, it's in here too, and in one of the earlier stanzas, those who know don't talk, and those who talk don't know. And we got a lot of people in this day and age doing a lot of talking. I am going to move on from that though, because sometimes part of me kind of doesn't really super like the wording of it. This one I actually got as a Christmas gift one time, and I'm very thankful for it. It is The Art of War. So The Art of War is sort of the main thing that has it, but it has other sort of classics with this. It's a Canterbury classics. There's Art of War, Tao Te Ching, Confucian Analects, which is, if you want to kind of study where things come from, especially in Chinese thought, that's definitely something you want to look up. Works of Mencius, who I think was a student of Confucius, and a couple other ones in with that too. I haven't read The Great Learning and The Doctrine of the Mean. I haven't read. I've read some Mencius. I've read the Confucian Analects, I think a couple times. I've read the Outer War once or twice. Tao Te Ching, I've read several versions several times. But this is from this, and I'm very thankful that I got this as a gift one year for Christmas. Again, chapter 71. This is in with Roman numerals. So if yours has Roman numerals, if you're reading along, it'll be LXXI. L being 50, X is being 10s, and I being 1. It's sort of broken down in two. It's 1 and 2, so it breaks down the paragraphs. To know and yet think we do not know is the highest attainment. Not to know and yet think we do is a disease. It is simply by being pained at the thought of having this disease that we are preserved from it. The sage has not the disease. He knows the pain that would be inseparable from it, and therefore he does not have it. So the idea of it is simply at being pained at the thought of having this disease that we are preserved from it. So it's like, oh, I don't want to be that. I want to not have, well, again, in this day and age, it might even start with, I don't want to be that guy who's always sort of the know-it-all sort of thing. So what do I have to do to not be that? Well, one of the things, you have to pay attention to what you do, what you say, and how you do and say it. Then once you're starting to get the discipline with that, then you have to start going into what your mind's doing, what that inner monologue in here or even in here is talking about as well. Of, someone says something or someone does something, and your immediate response is you got to respond. You got to say, well, maybe you don't. Maybe we can kind of back off from that a little bit. So to know and yet think we do not know is the highest attainment. So you go through life, you're going to acquire knowledge and thoughts and practice and maybe some skill, maybe you've worked on some natural talents. All these things will be garnered as you live. But then not sort of now saying it was like, well, I've read, my example, I've read a handful of books on, indigenous American history and thought and spirituality. I've read a bunch of books on ancient Egypt, both the history as well as the sort of spirituality and the gods and goddesses and stuff. I've listened to or watched and everything, tons of lectures or tons of programs on this, both of those cultures from almost as long as I can remember, especially Egypt. Stuff with Japan and China too. And I have these experiences with people from the cultures. I've been incredibly fortunate enough to have a lot of people who have welcomed me into their cultures, in a lot of different cultures too. Puerto Rican, Mexican, Chinese, Korean, the different Jewish cultures, tons of stuff and everything like that. And I'm very thankful for being allowed to partake in those things with people, um, because it's been wonderful with that. That doesn't make me an expert in any of them in any way, shape, or form. I wouldn't even say I'm an expert even in my own culture, even if we're talking about not only genetic, but just in the one that we live in conditionally, you know, and to take me, that there does sound at the moment I'm even and I but even now saying this the way I'm saying it, I'm starting to get twitchy at feeling that it was like, well, now I'm just sort of like bragging, using this as an excuse to brag, and I don't even like that, you know. But it goes back to what we said: those who know don't talk, and those who talk don't know. And I've been talking a lot, so. But not to know and yet think we do know is a disease. Now, you can think of it as dis-ease, break it down, where now that there's a function in the thinking in the mind that is scattered and isn't what would be considered correct, but now is a disease where now that can be passed on as well, especially if we're talking about people who are parents, because that conditioning we have, those thoughts that we have, get passed down. Even if we don't mean them to, our examples and our conditioning will get passed on. Even if you have every intention of raising your children in the most correct and healthy and positive way that we can, if you're not working on you and not trying to sort of, think and feel in ways that are maybe, above and beyond kind of maybe the way we were indoctrinated and cultured as we grew up, that stuff's going to get passed on as well. This is why we have cycles of abuse. There are people who are abused as children. They might not have liked it. They didn't enjoy it. But when now they become parents as well, which to me is a privilege as opposed to a right, but they take that privilege, and now that they have it, they act just the way they did before. And that not only is in terms of physical abuse, but this is also the way that people, like, oh, well, it was good enough for me, so it's good enough for you too. And even if it's sort of like, well, this is sort of a crappy way to think. It's a crappy way to be. You didn't like it when you did it to do, but you're putting that on me? It even goes on the way we talk, how we talk, what we think, what we talk about in terms of our values and things as well. But there are people who will go with the, well, that's the way it's always done, and that's it, so that's the way it is. So they think they know that that's correct, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's really unhealthy. So that's sort of like the way the disease as well. But to know and yet think we do not know is the highest attainment. So yeah, maybe you learned a lot about something, but there's always more to learn. As sort of like martial arts stuff and everything, if we go in with that, we talk about, again, I've been doing this for I've been playing Taiji and Xingyi and Bagua and some Qigong and stuff for, it'll be 21 years this August. So in about 3 more months, less than 3 months, be 21 years I'm doing that. And when I've done demonstrations or, talk to people about that, I'm very careful about how I present it, because honestly, like, there are tons of people who are going to be better than me in just the flat out physicality, in the martial application, whether it's push hands or just free fighting. There are going to be tons of people who understand the 8 energies and the 5 stepping, which is really what Taiji, if it was take, don't worry about Xingyi and Bagua right now, that'll take too much to explain. With Taiji, people know that a little bit more. Correct Taiji has 8 energies and 5 methods of stepping. And without those integrating into it, it's not Taiji. So, you get some, karate guy who's like, I made up my own Tai Chi, and all it really is that karate kata slowed down. Well, that's not Tai Chi. Maybe it's good because you're integrating whole body sort of stuff and maybe breathing differently and turning your karate internal, which is where a lot of things, even external Kung Fu and karate and all these other things, can get into with enough practice. That doesn't make it Tai Chi, though. You're just making your own practice internal, which is great and wonderful that there's higher levels for that. Cool. But there's always going to be people who are going to know it better. There's tons of people out there, even maybe like little kids, who will in tune correct Taiji principles and be able to enact that with their body and their mind and their breathing better than I ever will in my entire life. There are going to be some people that maybe have trained longer and maybe train harder than I do, that will still fall short of, maybe some development that I have. If we take a Western view of it and break it down in terms of a scale or something like that. I don't care about competing with it. I don't. I'm just trying to make me healthier and better and more than I was before. Mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, energetically, all those other things. I just want to kind of keep moving up that sort of vibrational scale even more. I don't care about competing. If someone can beat me, great. If I did my best, that's all I care about. I'm usually pretty hard on myself that no matter what I do, I don't feel I've done my best. It's one of the things when I was acting that was kind of gave me trouble. But there's always way more to go with Taiji. I can't remember which book it was. It might have been in Steal My Art. It might have been in that. I can't remember exactly, but there was a master who was asked, he'd been playing for like 60, 70 years, and they're like, well, how does it feel like to play Taiji perfect? And the guy was like, well, there was this one time I thought I played it perfectly. And then, like, even the very next day, I played it better, and I realized I didn't play it perfectly. And like I kind of felt that, because there are times where I'm just like, oh man, I feel really good playing, or you feel really good meditating, or you're having a conversation with someone and it gets really deep and really sort of philosophical and all big, and you're like, man, you feel pretty good about that. And then you see something or hear something or even have another conversation later where other stuff's coming up, and like, man, I really kind of messed that up. That wasn't what I thought it was. And as a person, as a conscious being, there's always going to be more to go. There's always going to be more to learn. If you're really, really scientifically oriented, there's always going to be more to learn. There's always new sciences that are coming up, new maths that are being brought up and planned and practiced. other ways to integrate stuff like that. If you're like really, really artsy and really a poet, there's always going to be some other art style to study. There's always going to be some other person that uses color differently or has an interesting way to turn a language. Or even now, if you're a poet, you want to up that up, maybe start learning a different language, because that will help you now think about your poetry in different ways, because the way different people use language. There's always a way to then, even if you're considered a master in your field, there's always some place to go, always some place to learn, always something to do, and then be able to integrate that back in. That's one of the things with a lot of these spiritual practices is, people you can have these really huge, like, mind altering, soul altering experiences, but if you don't do the work to integrate it back into your life, it's just sort of like you had this cool experience. You rode a roller coaster, great. What are you doing about it? This is why, if you're really playing Tai Chi, it's not just, oh, well, I play it around and, oh, you get the sort of hippier dancing. Oh, don't I feel great and relaxed? And you go out and still kind of be a jerk. You're not integrating Tai Chi. There has to be, you have these moments and then you integrate them back in your life with your personality, what you do, how you do it, what you say, how you do it, how you think, and all that sort of thing. So when you get someone who, martial artists, maybe they reach, Sifu or black belt or something like that, and then, yeah, they teach, but, sorry, big belly does not mean big chi. Yeah, Yang Chen Fu was a bigger guy and everything like that, maybe a little what we might consider kind of unhealthy now or something, but he was still training and practicing and doing all this stuff every single day. And he was still trying to evolve his practice and move on once he committed to it, because he didn't kind of commit to it at first, apparently. And then once he did, he really committed to it. So now you get someone who's like, yeah, I've been doing this, I've been playing like, Hungar or something for 30, 40 years and everything. Yeah, it's cool. But, you never see him play. They always have something critical about everybody. They're not putting work into it. So it's, their knowing got to a point and they stopped. And they thought they knew it all. But it's like, well, no, there's still a lot of other stuff to go. So I've been elaborating on that for long enough. Let me keep going here. So this is a complete works of Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching and the Hua Hu Jing. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Again, I'm not 100% sure. A translation and elucidation by Hua Qing, elucidation, so illuminating, sort of commentary of, and it is from 7 Star Communications. This is what it looks like. So 71. He who regards his intellectual knowledge has ignorance let me try it again. Rewind. He who regards his intellectual knowledge as ignorance has deep insight. He who overrates his intellectual achievement as definite truth is deeply sick. Only when one is sick of this sickness can one cease to be sick. One who returns his mind to the simplicity of the subtle truth is not sick. He who knows to break through the conceptual knowledge in order to directly reach the subtle truth of the universe. This is the foundation of his health. So you see, we have 3 translations and now 3 very different ways to look at it. So again, if someone just like, oh, I read the Tao Te Ching and I've read it 15 times and I've read these other things with that. So he who regards his intellectual knowledge as ignorance has deep insight. So they know, okay, I have intellectual knowledge. Okay, you can say and be like, all right, I have a certain skill of this thing. And you can probably say that without a certain amount of pride. So if you're a carpenter and you can make those sort of tongue and groove things, so you can make these, angled boxes, and you don't need any glue, you don't need any screws or nails, but you can make like these puzzle boxes and everything with just the tongue and groove, just like that. You have what would be considered a gong fu of that sort of carpentry, and you know what, you can be like, yeah, I can do that. But now it's like, yeah, I can do that, and I've mastered all carpentry or something. That might be a problem. That's where that sickness, that dis-ease comes in. someone here, he who overrates his intellectual achievement as definite truth is deeply sick. So that, well, actually, I saw this YouTube thing and they said this, so you're wrong. Or even if some people have, and we see this now a lot too with some of like the religion of science that we have in the West, where everything's completely reductionist, and there are people, and their whole thing is like, well, we're better in science than everybody else because when there's new information comes in, we integrate it in. But when there's new information that comes in, valid, reliable, which are the two major things for the scientific method. So you test what you're going to test, and you can test it over time, and it's peer reviewed, and it meets the different sigma levels of appropriateness and everything like that. But it's different from the predominant paradigm. All of a sudden now you get a lot of scientists who now look at it like that's crap, it's on the fringe, it's nothing, throw it out. Not, and a lot of times they don't have a way to refute it. They're just using no, 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 no. And I've seen some of these science celebrities that we have now do that to other people who are also, high level professors and teachers and all these other things, whose work is peer reviewed, whose work is valid and reliable, whose maths are all checked out and everything like that. And yet they're now being shunted to the side or almost being ridiculed in some things because it's different from a paradigm that these people can't wrap their heads around. But that's not what we do. But it is. Because now we're talking about human ego. Now we're talking about people whose sort of livelihood and life and ego and image is wrapped up in one thing, and then something feels threatening about that. So when you're tired of that idea of, well, oh, I know this, so I'm an expert with this and I'm an expert with that. When you there's a point where you sort of start getting sick of that in yourself, or there should be, and you're like, especially if you're presented with enough things that now show you that there's still places for you to go, things for you to learn. Maybe someone younger is coming in doing it better. Maybe now you didn't research stuff for 20 years and you're just like, oh, well, I'm still interested in this thing that I like, and you read something that got put out in the last 5 and you're like, whoa, what the hell happened? Stuff's changed. Holy crap. I got to get back up on this sort of thing. When you recognize that own dis-ease, that own ego of your own mind going, well, I'm derp. Oh, look at me, king of the castle, king of the cat. When you're just like, well, maybe not. This is now where learning happens. This is where now that ignorance starts being shed with that. So, and that's where the simplicity is. Because, okay, now you think about it, well, I'm an expert in everything. I know this, and I know that, and I know this, 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 I know this. You start getting complicated. You start getting what we were talking about in the last video, the sort of part A of this, of now you went from, the 1 or 2 things to the 10,000 things. But the idea is to get back up to that one whole thing. So you've complicated yourself. You've got too many, was it too many cooks spoil the soup? You've got too many cooks and too much stuff in the soup. So now you got to kind of get rid of that and be able to be like, if you have that mind of now, I'm learning as you go, it's a simpler perspective on it. So he who knows to break through conceptual knowledge in order to directly reach the subtle truth of the universe. This is the foundation for health, of his health. So the conceptual knowledge, so the gathering of a lot of stuff in the brain of things that you know, which is different than kind of being able to process that. I used to say, and I still kind of hold to this a little bit, there's a difference between being smart and being intellectual. Now I came up with this when I was like kind of a kid, so there's a sort of kid's understanding with this, and it's a very sort of generalization. But someone who's smart can know a lot of stuff. Maybe there's certain eidetic or photographic memory, where they can kind of recite chapter and verse from like everything they've read, or so now maybe I'm just talking to my friend about, he's getting someone into finally watching like the extended versions of like Lord of the Rings, and as much as I know people who love Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's works and The Hobbit and even some of his other stuff, I've like his version of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and all these other things. A lot of people are sort of like the Silmarillion, man. And my buddy I'm talking to that with, he's like, maybe I need to take notes on all the names because he kind of gets lost in the names, and I can understand it because there are a lot of names. But I always liked a lot of mythology growing up, and I love the Silmarillion. I've read it like 4 times or something like that. I've read Dune like 3 or 4 times now and everything, and those are things. Both of those books are amongst the pile of books that I'm mad at myself that I didn't read when I was like a kid or a teenager or something like that. And even though I've read them 4 or 5 times, I don't know everything about it. I don't consider myself a scholar of him or a Tolkien scholar or anything like that. I've listened to a ton of lectures about Tolkien. I listen to people talk about Tolkien and combine him with, he had certain red book and then Jung's red book, and then like all these weird combinations of that and everything. And I've listened to the audiobooks of Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion, and then people talking about his life and this, that. I'm not a scholar of it. I'll read the Silmarillion and again I'll be like, crap, I forgot about that too. Crap, I forgot about that too. But there's going to be people out there who are going to know the Silmarillion backwards and forwards. And, if I'd be like, oh, the trees, Teleraphon, and I forget what the other one is. Even now, I'm not even joking. I forget what the other one is. I'd be like, it's blah, blah, blah. And they get like mad that you know that. Oh, okay. But if you read the Silmarillion, do you enjoy it? Or are you reading it because you're collecting knowledge to then be smarter than somebody else? You know, yeah, I like having knowledge about that. I like having a backlog of things, be it Star Wars or Tolkien or martial arts or Egypt or you know, uh, things about like the Lakota or something like that, or Halloween or voodoo. Like I like knowing stuff. But I do it because I like it and I like knowing that stuff. Um, but now the difference in with being smart about it versus being intelligent about it is how do you process that information? This is one of my problems with the standardized tests we have in the US now, because all we're teaching is put junk in, spit it out. It used to be, and I didn't come from an exactly wonderful school system, but it used to be if there's 10 chapters in your textbook, if you got through 7, you did pretty good, but maybe you know a little bit more about that 7 than if you do it. It's like, all right, well, we have to get through all 10 chapters of this book in less time, because you don't have from August to June to get through this. You have August to maybe March, because in March you're taking the test. So now you're getting through the book, all of it, faster, and you're expected to know like specific stuff. But what are you doing with that? Someone who's intelligent can take these different parts and these different things they might be smart in, and maybe they can bring them together and look at things in different ways, or look at even the one thing in a slightly different perspective. Turn it to the side. I'm not a fan of David Mamet, the playwright, but he wrote and directed a movie called Red Belt. It is rated R, but it's a wonderful movie, and even for David Mamet, like I love the movie. Chiwetel Ejiofor is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu teacher who used to be in the military, and like all this stuff kind of happens in his life where I mean his school isn't really making that much money, but he's doing what he loves, how he loves to do it, and he has a certain sort of moral code that he goes by, and that's really tested in the movie from all sort of angles. And it gets, I mean, it's a pretty heavy movie in a couple places in with it, but he sticks to that moral code and that sort of higher right to it. And he's talking to one guy about it. It was like, turn it to the side. You got a problem or anything, look at it at like a different angle. There's always, If he was using sort of like the wrestling sort of aspect, there's always an escape. For every hold, there's an escape. If you read it, they even talk about that in some, indigenous sort of cultures to say for every disease, nature gives like a ratio to it. For every disease, there's a cure. For every poison, there's an antidote. And it's maybe if you're stuck in your small little paradigm of what it is, and I don't care if it's science, if it's math, if it's poetry, if it's religion, if it's behaviorism, if it's you know even these things that we have now that claims to be all this woke stuff, this social justice sort of things, like, oh, I know this because I'm so much better. It's sometimes people still get in this tiny little paradigm, and it becomes diseased, and it becomes kind of what it's trying to battle. It becomes just as sort of damaging and detrimental to people socially and emotionally and things like that as these other things are trying to fight, because it just gets stuck in this little thing. So being intellectual, having intelligence, then would be able to kind of see around that, through it. I see these things, the only way out is through. Well, maybe not necessarily. There could be under, there could be over, it could be around. There could be you just sit there and maybe it washes over you. So it's not always the case. So being able to have that fluidity, flexibility of mind is going to help then release that dis-ease. So it's, there are other parts of this that will talk about the difference between in like a twig. You have a twig that's on the ground, that's been there on the ground for a while. It might be very hard. It might hurt if you get hit with it, but you can break it. Now you take the sapling, now you take the live branch. You might be twisting and turning and everything else, all like that, but it's really hard to break because it's still fluid. It still has life in it. A couple more. Almost done. I say that as if I haven't read the same thing 3 times already. Okay, so this is going to be, I've got 3 volumes of Taoist classics here from Shambhala Press. Again, Thomas Cleary. Yeah, Thomas Cleary. Yeah, for some reason I kept wanting to call him Tom Clancy. It's not it at all. Uh, so we have Thomas Cleary's version in this. Now, I'll be honest, I have not read every single page of every single thing in all 3 different volumes of all that. His Tao Te Ching, and you can see, I've marked up and read through part of this. I haven't even read every single page of this, and the other ones I've sort of cherry picked some of the things. Some of the stuff I've read a couple of times. Like there's one that, is the 16 ounces of yin and the 16 ounces of yang combined to make 1 pound of elixir, which is a sort of Taoist alchemy sort of thing. Again, symbolic, because if you drink a mixture of cinnabar and lead and mercury, you will die. Like the people who literally did that. It's not meant to be taken literally. Thank you, T. God, I need to eat. But again, someone who, there are some things that have the brand that they do for a reason. Some people are famous authors or translators, or they have a ton of books out for a reason. Just because someone is prolific in their works doesn't mean that there's really a lot behind it. Some of these pop stars or people directing or are in a lot of movies, just because they have a lot of movies out doesn't mean they're necessarily quality. They might make money to a certain extent, but it's maybe not super great. But some of the people put out a lot of books, but Terry Pratchett's like that. Terry Pratchett had a lot of books out, but I've read probably what I've got 4, 8, like 10 there. I've read maybe another 5 or 6 or something like that out of like 30 or something like that. They've all been quality. Agatha Christie had 80 something books to her canon. I've read about half of them. I've enjoyed every single one of them. Some of them might have been better than others, or some of them, most of them, I'm kind of like, oh, it's this person. I've figured stuff out. Some of them like, holy crap, you got me. But I've enjoyed all of them. And there are some people that have, yeah, like Tom Clancy or something. Like, I haven't really read a lot of Tom Clancy or Dean Koontz or some of these other ones. I have a lot of books, but some of them are kind of the same in some of these. There are even people that said, like, some of these people who've got the 40, 50 books out and they put out a book every year. They have maybe 2 or 3 outlines and they just sort of start changing some names once in a while, and that's about it. But they're still pumping books out every year. The quality is maybe not so great. But I think Thomas Cleary is one of the people who, there's a reason why his stuff is out there a lot. All right, so he titles this Knowing Unconsciously. To know unconsciously is best. To presume to know what you don't is sick. Only by recognizing the sickness of sickness is it possible not to be sick. The sage's freedom from ills was from recognizing the sickness of sickness, so they didn't suffer from sickness. So unconsciously, I think is not necessarily talking about the unconscious as, like, what we refer to as the subconscious, but now it's, you've taken in maybe the actual data and it's been integrated in to kind of, your sort of general stuff without it now having the attachment to, now this is data, and you're sort of storing it like you would like gold or your savings account in a bank. It's not, you're not accumulating it with that. So unconscious. See, it's like I'm thinking about this differently just because he's using different words, which is why I wanted to use 5 different, the 5 different ones that I have, because there's tons of other ones. But this is why I want to do that, because even now reading this out, I'm thinking about it differently, even now within less than 45 minutes. To presume to know what you don't is sick. So even if you have data, a lot of data on a subject doesn't necessarily mean that you know all of it. So saying you're an expert on a subject or a master of a subject is taking a big step, because you're kind of taking a certain responsibility for knowing everything about it. So it's you're kind of putting yourself in a funky position there with it, and that's where the sickness is, because that's like ego and greed coming in with this. So recognizing that sickness, recognizing that that's ego, recognizing that greed is the only way you're going to get through it. By saying, oh, everything's okay and everything's fine, when things are not fine, is going to be sickness. I'm not that old, but I've been around enough. And even though I wish I could have traveled more at this point in time in my life, I still have a certain sort of breadth of experience to sort of go with, being an expert, being a master of someone. You're putting yourself out there to a certain thing, and sort of be wary of that. And it's maybe it's not super great to be a master of things all the time. Maybe it's better just to learn and grow with what you want to learn and grow with, but then maybe enjoy it a little bit. So a sage's freedom from those ills, that sickness, the way they got that was from recognizing it for what it is. So he became healthy. He, she, it, and or they became healthy from that sort of dis-ease, because they recognized what it was and then took steps to integrate a healthier, more correct way of going with themselves in terms of life, so they didn't suffer from the sickness. I think suffer might be a specifically choiced word from that, because we're talking about sort of using the Four Noble Truths out of. See, this is what I'm talking about now. My cat is very good at being a cat. She's pretty cat. She's not stupid. She's pretty smart in a lot of ways. She'll actually, it seems like, kind of ask permission to come up and be by me or sit on my lap or anything else like that. She seems to recognize some human words. she knows certain things. She can recognize when I'm getting ready to leave and everything else like that, and all this other stuff. But she has also learned that I have an older house, and there were certain things that upkeep wise has been lacking. I've done my best in the time I've been here to do what I can with some of the upkeep, but we'll get into the rest of that. But there's like kind of this little screen door over here, and it got knocked through from people who were working on things on the little railing thing I have outside of that. It got knocked through with that. And also little critters have kind of come through, so it's a little bit loose anyway. And parts of the muttons on the door, you can see little stuff from either the chipmunks or the raccoons that are over here. And then the people working on stuff kind of pushed through some of the things with the screens going in and out. They were less than mindful with it. So I've tried to tape some stuff up best I can. I'm not an expert on the screen doors, and I don't own the place, so I can't put new screen doors on there. But she has learned how to, she pushed through the tape I had on there. And she got out. And she's out like on a little porch. She has been an indoor cat since we took her in when she was a tiny little thing and almost died. And she's never really been out. Took her to the vet a couple times, but other than that, she's never really been out of the house. So, and she's terrible at playing, so I really don't think she's got that sort of killer hunter instinct. So she's not going to do well out there. So she went out there, got freaked out, and kind of tried to come back in and couldn't come back in right, was freaked out by that. And I came and got her. She didn't like that either. And then she did it again the next day, which is yesterday, and got rained on. She really didn't like that. In fact, I'm opening the door for her to come back in because I could see she was coming back in. And instead of going in the main door, she jumps in back through the broken screen. So now I'm trying to save money on not having the air conditioner on all the time, especially when I don't need it. Fresh air, getting some of the stagnant energy and everything else out. Great. So she's trying to do it again, having learned nothing. And that's kind of an illustration of what we're talking about. So there's a certain mind that, oh, I have all this data, I'm good at being this thing, but when put up against it, I kind of keep doing some of this dumb stuff. Okay, so last one. Now this one, as you can tell, there's no ISBN, there's no barcode or anything else like that. This was put together by a very good friend of mine, and she got it from the Wudong Dao website. It's wudongdao.com, I believe. And Wudong Dao, you'll see the guy being listed as Master Bing. It's, trying not to slaughter the name, Master Zong Sui Chao. This guy is a full-blown Taoist. He has spent years and years and years learning like Wudong Gong Fu and Taoism and the meditations and the Qigong and everything on Wudong Mountain. You can't really get much more Taoist than that in this day and age. I believe he lives in the U.S. now, but, Taoist guy. And so this is the she formatted it and made it look really nice. As you can kind of see, it looks really good. It's on good paper. I think she even went to a printer and got it done. It's bound all nice like this. This is the version that, if I'm going to reread it, I'm probably going to reread this version. This is the version I've read the most of. I prefer this to the other ones that I have read. So thank you, Donna. So again, 71. Not knowing is true knowledge. Presuming to know is disease. First realize that you are sick, then you can move toward health. The master is her own physician. She has healed herself of all knowing, thus she is truly whole. So the work is your own. no religion, no hierarchy, whether it be a pope, a bishop, a minister, a priest, whether it be, Christian or Buddhist or anything else like that. No scientist, no parent, no teacher is going to be able to make you a complete person and awakened, enlightened being. You've got to do the work yourself. So you have to pay attention to not only your own thoughts and your own feelings and your own behavior, but that response from the outside world, which will give you a clue. It's the thought cycle from like CBT. The outside world gives you a clue to your behavior. Your behavior gives you a clue to your feelings. Your feelings give you a clue to your thoughts. You're going to be the one that has to do the work, put forth the effort to know these things, to pay attention to this, and to recognize that there's always going to be room for improvement. There's always going to be room for change. There's always going to be room to then be like, oh, okay, I can still learn. To not be that sort of stagnant water of knowing and be like, oh no, I got this, I know this, da 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 da. To know that way lies that dis-ease, that way lies that sickness. That way is her own physician. You physician, heal thyself. Do this work for yourself to understand what you need to do to kind of get back into that, again, that undifferentiated whole, to release all that other stuff and be able to move sort of back up that sort of scale. So presuming to know is a disease, because you don't. You're never going to know everything. Presuming, having the idea that you're a massively knowledgeable person. And again, you it's like almost a talent or a skill. You might have a lot of data. You might have a lot of experience that allows you to interpret that in different ways. Yeah, I'm watching you. You might have a lot of this other stuff with that, but that doesn't mean that that's everything. That doesn't mean that now you're an awakened, enlightened being with this too. You might be able to quote verse in scripture from any number of religions and play Tai Chi beautifully, and then maybe even had some sort of weird and wonderful other experiences. But now you're sitting there, well, this is what it is. It is this. I know this is what this is. You're having a problem now. That's where that dis-ease comes in. So being able to release that sort of, we talked about some of the other things where Bruce Kumar Francis was talking about the 4 conditions you want to release in meditation. That's strength. That's strength. That's that I know this. This is what this is. That's strength. And being able to sort of poof, release that then becomes being able to free yourself from that condition with that. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't skilled people, aren't talented people, haven't done study, haven't done research, might or might not be brilliant in any of the various and variety of ways that people can be brilliant. But holding on to that almost diminishes that intelligence, diminishes that brilliance, because then it's now this is what this is, and you're making it now this. Well, that's where the disease comes in. What was the thing? I think they're Buddhist things where anger and hatred is holding a hot coal and expecting the other person to get burned, or drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick or die from it. You're doing that to yourself, is kind of what that's saying with it. Holding on to that is that coal, is that poison, where now you're stifling your own growth as a person. Even if we're just talking about sort of a Maslow hierarchy of needs and getting into that self-actualization top of the pyramid, even if it's just that, you're still holding yourself back from now being that sort of self-important. Because now we're even talking about maybe there's that safety part of that thing where you've got that ego going about how much I know, because maybe you're feeling a little afraid, maybe you're feeling a little thing, and that goes to, if you want to use that as the scale for it as well, if you buy into that, great, you can use it with that. So that's, again, there's a couple of reasons why I wanted to use specifically chapter or verse or stanza 71 of the Tao Te Ching. And I'm not getting into the other stuff, but I think it's an important one, and I wanted to give a variety of perspectives on it again. And again, sort of an outro, not an expert, not a vow or precept taken Taoist. This is merely where I'm at with it now, and not only as I kind of am with that normally, but also someone whose blood sugar has died about 20 minutes ago, and I'm starting to get, you can see that, shaky, and my hands are starting to buzz and get numb, and I'm super sweaty and tired. So I'm going to end this now, so I can get something to eat so I don't pass out. Ciao. Thank you for listening.